We are talking mindfulness and happiness today with Greg Hammer, MD. He's a recently retired professor at Stanford University School of Medicine, a pediatric intensive care physician, pediatric anesthesiologist, and also a wellness and mindfulness lecturer. He's the author of Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals. And that definitely applies to everybody else and not just healthcare professionals. We are going into what GAIN is. It's an acronym, and is kind of the four big hitters that he hits on that lead to personal happiness. We got into a pretty philosophical, how should I put it? Yeah, it was a deep one today. Very philosophical conversation, and we are just so aligned in terms of what we have experienced in our own lives and what we now teach about that really leads to a place of internal peace and less suffering, less unnecessary suffering. So we'll go ahead and dive into it. Here is Dr. Greg Hammer. Okay, so Dr. Hammer, I'm excited to talk to you today about gain without pain. And I, wanted to just dive right into it. Can you tell us what you mean? What is gain without pain? That the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals is your book, but what do you mean by gain?
GAIN is an acronym, Tara, for what I think are really the fundamentals of mental and spiritual well-being. And they are gratitude, that's the G in GAIN, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And as we were acknowledging prior to the recording, the fundamentals of physical well-being are sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And I think that gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment are the fundamentals of mental and spiritual well-being, and they are extremely interrelated. So not only are sleep, exercise, and nutrition very integrated and interrelated, but so are gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. And then, of course, those elements for physical and spiritual well-being are very much interrelated. So it
Mm-hmm.
all goes together. It's kind of hard to talk about one
Mm-hmm.
element without the others. But in
Right.
particular, when we talk about the GAIN elements, domains, and the GAIN practice, those four domains are really inseparable.
Yeah, I mentioned to you before we started, and I'll just let the audience in on like how aligned we are on this. Because yes, in my coaching, we do training and nutrition and some deeper lab, all that health stuff. But for the life coaching end of things, I'm really big on circadian rhythm. Like I see circadian rhythm not really, yeah, it's a health thing, but I see it mostly significantly as a mindset meets internal happiness meets being able to be at peace throughout the day, be operating at full tilt, be able to change, have the bandwidth to be able to be kind to yourself and take a look at your life and not feel overwhelmed and burnout and not have all these mood dysregulations from your hunger hormones being thrown off and your body's trying to guess what's going on every day. I see honestly sleep hygiene as more of in the mindset part of the coaching that I do than I do the health part. And it's been significant for me. I didn't get that on lock until like the beginning of 2022. So it's only been like 2.5 years for me of this, but I've been shouting from the rooftops. I'm like, man, I was already healthy. I was already fit. I already, was good with eating. Like I was already a meditator. I was already, all those things. I'm like, are you guys hearing me? I'm telling you, everything in my life went from like chaos and hard to like this like extreme sense of ease. Like it was so profound for me. It was almost as profound as when I went from standard American diet to getting healthy. It was about like that level of like, wow, life can be like this, from going to bed about the same time and getting up at the same time. Or I was just like, wow, everything's so much easier now. Everything's so much easier. I'm so much happier. So I love that you hit on this specific thing on top of just, it's not just like exercise and eating well. If your sleep is all over the place and you're not having some of these mindfulness practices, I did that. I looked really fit on the outside. I was not doing well on the inside. And sometimes I don't think you realize that. Like you don't realize you can feel better until you do, right? So, okay, I want to take a second to really go into each of these. I know you're like, it's kind of hard to talk about anything in a vacuum because that's not reality, but Gratitude, it is a practice for me. I did it this morning. It's very rare that I miss my kind of my anchor moment in the morning because I love it so much and I've seen what it brings to me in my life. So, on this, the gratitude, why did you bring this into you're only hitting on 4 things here. Why was gratitude one of them?
Gratitude is so intrinsic to happiness.
Hmm.
I think we all can appreciate that one can be poor and happy, one can be physically challenged and happy,
Yeah.
but you can't even imagine somebody who's ungrateful and happy.
Yeah.
And gratitude is really part of, I would say, at least those that are familiar to me, all spiritual and philosophical traditions.
Hmm.
Gratitude is embedded as a mainstay. And so
Hmm.
I think there's just no getting around it. It's essential to that one thing that all nearly 8 billion of us want, which is happiness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what the book is about. And I think that's what you and I are both all about.
Yeah. Yeah, I sometimes like you could try it right now if you're listening, like feel grateful for something and like try it at the same time to feel like any sort of negative emotion. It's impossible. I've tried even feeling gratitude for my muscles as I'm doing a really heavy squat and it's like, wow, like you're literally happy instead of like fearful or scared or like, oh my gosh, like it's like, wow, good job, quads. Wow, I'm so grateful I can do this. It just takes you over the top. So it's true, and for me, I do a written gratitude practice and I write how I feel when I think about those things besides grateful. And that's just a practice for me and my clients now too, to tap in to become more emotionally aware of, what am I feeling besides grateful? What other things are coming in here? Even if sometimes those are like, I'm grateful for that and I feel scared. I'm grateful for that and I feel pressured about it. Just noticing, you know, um, uh,
Well,
what
that's
else
why
is behind
the
that.
the second domain of gain is acceptance, because
Mhm.
it's great to have gratitude, it's essential, but it's not sufficient. I
Yeah.
think we need the other three elements as well. But I think that our brains are wired in ways that evolved for our survival to increase our chances of surviving. And in some cases, those are at odds with our ability and desire for happiness, ability to
Yeah.
be happy. And one example is that we have a negativity bias. We tend to remember the negative and embrace it and forget about the positive.
Mhm.
And that's very much related to gratitude. Gratitude is the cure for our negativity bias, along
Mm.
with
Yeah.
acceptance, intention, non-judgment. And an example is, many of us begin to have negative thoughts even before we get out of bed. So we're practicing good sleep hygiene. We slept well. We get up at our appointed time. But even before we get out of bed, there's a natural tendency, according to the way our brains are wired, to think of something negative. So my knee is a little bit sore. So I'm turning over. I notice that I'm having a little bit of pain in my knee. Maybe I overdid it with the squats yesterday, what have you. So I focus on that. I focus on the discomfort I might feel as I'm getting out of bed and walking to the commode. Instead, we can easily retrain ourselves, or maybe not easily, but most definitely retrain ourselves to think positive through gratitude. So
Yeah.
imagine, instead of focusing on that one negative thing about our physiology,
Right.
we instead focus on something positive for which we're grateful. What a
Mhm.
miracle that our kidneys were working all night, that our kidneys are filtering our blood, removing all these toxins from our blood, sending them in this fluid down to our bladder where it's conveniently stored so we don't have to get up every 15 minutes,
Mhm.
stored overnight. And then we get up in the morning and we can just get rid of that. What a
Mhm.
beautiful physiologic system that was
Mhm.
working for most of us perfectly while we were sleeping. I'm so grateful for that. It's just remarkable. It blows me away when I think about
Mhm.
the myriad aspects of our physiology that normally are working well. But because of our negativity bias, we often ignore those and we focus instead on that one
Right.
negative thing. And
Right.
so again, gratitude is essential to helping us rewire the brain and transcend this negativity bias that we have. But
Hmm.
again, I think that we're well served by incorporating the other domains of gain as well.
Yeah, and on this gratitude note, like it's such an important one in relationships, right? Because of this negativity bias, it's so easy to just hone in on the negatives and on our relationships. And when we use our own intention by choice to make it a way of being, to start to have gratitude, express gratitude, feel gratitude for things that we may have missed before, which is, in my opinion, the whole point of the practice. Think about how much that impacts our relationship. So instead of just nitpicking on all the little things that are going wrong with and that's always going to be with those closest to us. So our most important relationships are going to be the ones where that negative bias is going to come up most frequently. And I think this is like, I mean, at least I've noticed that for me, like it has really impacted being able to access that feeling of gratitude more frequently in every relationship that I have in my life. Like, wow, I really appreciate that about you. Thank you so much. Like, oh, like that's really sweet how you were about that. Thank you. And so seeing as how from that Harvard study, that the quality of our relationships was the highest indicator of longevity and happiness, I think that it's probably, a pretty important thing to practice within ourselves. Cause, have you noticed that also that it becomes a way of being in terms of relationships when you're more relationship
Absolutely. I
quality when
think
you're more
though,
grateful?
it starts with ourself,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And you can actually incorporate this into work on relationships. You can look in the mirror and say, could I have a successful relationship with someone just like me? Or are the faults that I embody going to be the foci for my attention in a relationship with another human being?
Mm,
So that goes to acceptance. But yes,
mhm,
absolutely. We have to be grateful for all of the gifts in life, and that includes the loving kindness that we can share with other people. And we need to have a plan. That's the I in gain, is intention. So we need to have an intention to do on purpose this rewiring of our brain
mhm,
toward gratitude, toward
mhm,
accepting things that are uncomfortable or painful that we cannot change.
mhm.
We have to be able to do it on purpose. I love Dr. John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness, simply awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally. Why on purpose? Because being aware of the present moment is not our nature. We talked about
Yeah.
the fact that our brain is wired to be negative. It's also wired to be distracted. If you
Mm,
close your eyes, if one closes their eyes and simply tries to focus on our current sensation, the pressure of the chair against our body,
mhm,
the tingling of the soles of our feet, our mind will quickly wander to the past or the future. And when you combine that with our negativity bias, we overthink the past, we generate a lot of regret and shame and low self-esteem and imposter
mhm,
syndrome. Or our mind goes to the future and we obsess on the future with our negativity bias that generates a lot of fear and anxiety. So
mm,
this negativity bias and ability to be present
yeah.
require the I and gain intention, purposefulness, a plan, a practice. And the good
Mhm.
news is it's very accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. Curious your path on this. How did you come into, did you start with a meditation practice and kind of got you into this world?
Yeah, I was kind of a hippie. Started meditating and becoming a vegetarian and experimenting with psychedelics back in my university days.
Mm-hmm.
And but I was always very interested in science,
Mm-hmm.
and my undergraduate degree is in nutritional science, but I was also just very interested, as you could tell from my analogy with the kidney physiology. I just
Yeah.
always thought the way the human body worked was a
Yeah.
miracle. And
Yeah.
I was captivated from a young age in how the body works. And
Mm-hmm.
so that sort of encouraged me to go to medical school. And and then I got really interested in critical care medicine and cardiac anesthesiology for children. And I realized I'd be taking care of a lot of very sick and dying patients. and that many of my patients would die. And
Mm.
so I needed to take that head on. I didn't
Mhm.
want to have to keep a distance from my patients. I wanted to be present and close with them. So I
Mhm.
thought a lot about our mortality
Mhm.
and a lot about sort of the big questions in a very practical way. And so
Mm.
that just sort of led me further and further down this path of well-being. And
Mhm.
how is it that we can become happy even in the context of a great deal of suffering?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you've geeked out on, Viktor Frankl's book is like one of the most iconic, Man's Search for Meaning on that, and then The Happiness Advantage, Sean Acor, you're reminding me of this pursuit of like, what is it that we all want? So that's a question I've, really sat with of like, what is it that all my clients want? What is this? I'm like, oh, happiness. They perceive that if they do this thing, they will be more happy. That's what they're all chasing. All of us are chasing. We do all the actions we're taking, all the, things we get bent out of shape about is because we perceive that that's going to take away from our happiness, the fear and anxiety we get trapped in. Why? Because we want to be happy, even when people want to control others, as we saw during the COVID thing. Like it was like from both sides, like, even though there's these polarized extremes, I'm like, what do they want? They believe that their way is going to lead to people being safe and happy. Both sides, so it's like we all want the same thing. The mask, shot proponents are like, everybody needs to do this. Why? Because they want everybody safe and happy. The people who are like, no, we can't give away our freedom and you can't let people do this to us. Why? Because they want to make sure everybody's safe and happy. So different methodologies, everybody's chasing the same thing. And to me, I agree, like totally agree with you. It all boils down to that's what we're all looking for is we just want to be happy. So I love that you took this on. And as a fellow psychonaut, I'm so glad that you had those experiences when you're going to be having to be experiencing pediatric deaths, which would be a lot for most people. But, with psychedelics, your relationship with death kind of changes. I may still, yeah, let's see. I have a fear, I guess, that dying will hurt really bad. But in terms of like actually dying, I'm kind of curious what happens next, like I'm not really like like scared of that side of things. I'll
Yeah,
miss my
unfortunately,
kids
those
and
that have
friends, but
experienced it are unable to describe it for us.
right. Yeah, there's a lot of unknown, but I'm a curious mind. I'm kind of like, well, let's see. I know from my personal experiences, I definitely believe that this is not it. This is not the only thing that exists, and so I'm glad that you had those experiences, and that kind of segues us into hitting a little deeper onto acceptance, right? So, yeah, tell me more about this. So, acceptance, what do you mean?
Well,
Elaborate.
again, acceptance is a key element in most, if not all, positive religious and philosophic traditions.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
Serenity Prayer.
Mhm.
We ask for the ability to discern between what we can change and what we cannot change,
Yeah.
and the ability to cope with things we cannot change, to accept them. And that is of huge importance. And again, these elements are all highly interwoven. There's a formula in my first book, Gain Without Pain. Suffering equals pain times resistance. We love
Yeah.
formulas in medicine, of course.
Yeah.
So the pain is going to be there. I
Yeah.
lost my son 8 years ago. That pain isn't going away. But if I
Mhm.
resist it, if I try always not to think about it, if I never come to terms with it, if I resist it in so many other ways, as we can resist discomfort with other people and relationships by depersonalizing them, that's a form of resistance. The more we resist this pain, the more we suffer. So I kind of picture Jesus on the cross with stakes through his hands and feet. And of course, there was tremendous pain. But I like to think that he had fully accepted his circumstances and therefore had transcended suffering. So the pain is there. It's how we respond to it that will determine the degree to which we suffer. So if we can accept those elements by virtue of which the world apparently doesn't comport with our wants and needs,
Mhm.
that cause suffering, cause pain rather, um, discomfort. If we can really accept those things, then our suffering will diminish. And I think this is key. So I think it's important and necessary to be grateful. It's important and necessary to be intentional and
Mhm.
non-judgmental. Those are key. But we also have to face things that are painful and sit with them and really refine our skills to accept those things if we can't change them. And that's key to happiness as much as gratitude, intention, and non-judgment are.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that about losing your son. And I was curious to ask, because, for people I know who have um, someone very close to me lost his son as a young teenager in a very traumatic way, his only child. I've had other friends who've lost children, or, just there's people who, their whole family died in a car accident except them, like these like horrific, blindsiding traumas like that. Eh, do you have any coming from that, from your own experience, do you have any wisdom or insights to share on like what the journey to acceptance was like for you? Because I find that one, like when there's big traumas like that, it's very hard to get to a place of acceptance.
Mhm.
So just wondering if you have anything to share deeper on that.
Sure. As I said, I started really doing this work when I decided to go into cardiac anesthesiology and intensive care medicine because I knew I would be faced with a
Mhm.
lot of pain and suffering
Mhm.
patients and their families. So I decided early on that I needed to figure out a way to deal with this. And
Mhm.
for me, it's really just sort of I'm sort of an inward facing path person. I sort of
Mhm.
let go and allow myself to sink into my heart. And
Mhm.
one thing I find there is that we are all made of the same stuff, that there is only something we might call consciousness. You can call it God, you can call it
Mhm.
love, but we're all made of the same stuff. We are, in fact, all the same stuff.
Mhm.
And so we're not separate little souls as we are often want to believe. And that belief, in fact, is the root of all suffering. That's a very Buddhist
Yeah.
concept, that this
Mhm.
idea that we're separate cells that are apparently born, live, and then disappear is the
Mhm.
cause of all suffering. I don't believe that. I've come to believe through a lot of introspection and kind of sinking into my heart that all there is consciousness, and we're all made of this stuff. We're temporary little permutations of consciousness, like eddies in a stream. The stream is consciousness. We're a little ripple in the stream that seems to appear and then disappear, but it's never separate from the stream.
Yeah.
And so if you embrace a reality such as this, it very much influences the way you think about death, because death is not the disappearance of a separate self. Death
Mhm.
is just the eddy in the stream appearing to yield its energy back to the rest of the water. And I think this is a really important principle that we all need to kind of come to our own conclusions about our mortality. Again,
Mhm.
it's kind of
Mhm.
sitting with this reality, excuse me, and sitting with it and learning to accept it. And if we don't, then the alternative is we're resisting it. We're
Mhm.
horrified by this idea, and it haunts us.
Mhm.
So I just kind of looked it in the face and said to myself, um, sorry, I get somebody keeps insisting on reaching me, but maybe it's my son. Anyway, I took this on, and I think we all need to do the work, spend the time and energy
Mhm.
to embrace and accept that which causes us discomfort and pain.
Yeah.
And so that's been a long ongoing process for me. So I
Yeah.
felt like I was about as well equipped as one can be to deal with the loss of my son.
Thank you. Yeah, and just to kind of back up what you said, like my mom passed away in November, and I spent some time in nature, and there were a lot of like messages, teachings kind of coming through for me in terms of what is your relationship with decay? Because my mom, she had Alzheimer's, stroke, like she really didn't look good when she passed. And I was almost like traumatized by it, right?
Mhm.
And I spent some time in nature just seeing my mom like that. I mean, yeah, it was a lot. I spent some time in nature and I was like kind of instructed to pick up this seed we have in Hawaii here, these like kind of like big red oval seeds, and they're like these bright red seeds. And it was like, pick that up, put that in your fanny pack, I was like, okay. And I got home, I'm like, in just total zombie mode of just overwhelmed, and I put the seed, I emptied out my fanny pack, put the seed on my nightstand, going about life. And in a few days, I'm walking past the nightstand and I see that it's all started to like shrivel up and turn black and looks almost kind of like white moldy stuff on it. And my knee jerk reaction was, ew. Right? Like, I saw it all like that, and I was like, "Ew," and then and it was like, boom, and it was like, "Why is that ew? Why is that ew?" And I was like, "Alright." And I got invited on a big journey of like what my relationship was with decay. And like, if you look at, the forest, if you have any sort of forest or jungle, which you got to have something like that somewhere where you live, and you see all the dead leaves and pine needles and seeds and all of these things, it perfectly reflects what you were just saying about like coming back into the whole, and I think our egoic need for significance blinds us from being able to be okay with that sometimes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah.
the reason that nature, if you will, what we call nature is so essential to our being is that it reminds us that we are not a separate self.
Exactly.
When I go for a hike in the redwoods, you have these
Mm,
gigantic redwood and sequoia trees here in
so
Northern
cool.
California.
Awesome.
It's just an immediate sense of peace and being present. And when we
Yeah.
are present, there is no fear and
Yep.
anxiety. Those are in the future. Those are obsession with the future combined with our negativity bias. When
Mhm.
we're present, we're not ruminating over the past, again,
Mhm.
with our negativity bias. So
Mhm.
the ability to be present is really essential to happiness. And when you
Mhm.
are walking in the forest or potentially on the beach or just in a very natural environment, preferably not without a lot of noise and other people around, this sense of there is just this one consciousness,
Mhm.
nature, God, love, being,
Mhm.
awareness. And I'm not just a little separate self. I
Mhm.
am just a little eddy
Part of
in the
it.
stream, just like that
Yeah.
piece of organic material that you picked up. It's just returning to the source.
Mhm. Yep.
It's not, you can think of it as decay, but it's just the rhythm of these little outpouchings of consciousness that appear to come and go, but really they're always in place. They're always connected to everything else. And that's
Mhm.
our true nature. And so
Yeah.
we resist that because, as you said, we're clinging to this egoic
Mhm.
concept of how we're special and we want to be accomplished and we're separate.
Mhm.
We kind of bang our heads against the wall and try to find comfort in being separate, but it's a exercise in futility. The
Mhm.
path toward happiness is realizing our true nature, which is to be inexorably part of this greater
Mhm.
world, this consciousness.
Mhm.
And we get that in nature. We may get that with
Mhm.
listening to an amazing, timeless piece of music or looking at a piece of art that really compels us.
Yeah.
We're reminded that we are not just this little speck of individual stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that's a part of the realization of our true nature and
Mhm.
essential to happiness.
Yeah. I kind of want to skip for a second over to non-judgment in light of what you just said, because I have found that a huge barrier to being in the present moment is a desire to escape uh, self-judgment. I found that the pattern of self-abuse, being hard on oneself, never being good enough, like this insane internal pressure is a huge block and a huge problem that is pervasive amongst adults in this current period of time that we find ourselves in. And I think a lot of that has to do with how little psychological awareness there was in our parents' generation. I mean, they just didn't have we're, like, going scrolling through Instagram, and it's, like, the top, like, some of the biggest names in psychology are just, like, right spoon-fed right into our face about, here's what a trauma bond is, and here's what codependency is, and here's what, self-regulation, and here's how to regulate yourself. Our parents didn't that didn't exist, they coulda go to the library and roll the dice and hope they get a good, book on psychology, but they're probably not going to do that. So they didn't have that, right? So now we have a lot of adults who were raised with shaming, pressuring, conditional love, all as strategies to modify behavior for parents who didn't even realize that was they thought they were being really good parents, They thought they were teaching discipline and, like, helping them to grow up well or grow up right and, be a good person, whatever that parent deemed was good or right or well, And so as a result, now I have found that some of the biggest blocks to mindfulness and being in the present moment is that as soon as someone is left without any sort of outside distractions or the, busyness of, "Oh, gotta check the email. Oh, gotta blah, blah, blah. Gotta go run the errand." Like, without that, now they're sitting in this space where all of that is available on the table and can be very uncomfortable for people to really sit with that? And so I wanted to hit next on non-judgment and how that is important for being able to be in this present moment space.
Well, as you suggested, non-judgment is very closely linked to acceptance,
Yeah.
but it's also dependent on gratitude. So if we're
Yeah.
judging ourselves negatively, let's just sort of shift to being grateful for who we are
Yeah.
and all of the positive things about us, our health, our relative wealth. Most of us are not in severe poverty. Most of us have a roof over
Right.
our heads. Most of
Right.
us have accomplishments.
Yeah.
But non-judgment is so important because judgment is seeing the world around us, others, and most notably ourselves through our negativity bias.
Yeah.
It's seeing things through a colored lens, not necessarily as they actually are.
Yeah.
And that coloration, unfortunately, is often very negative because it's the way our brains are wired. So, how do we transcend that? Well, the gain meditation practice can be done in 3 or 4 minutes. It
Nice.
starts with slow, deep breathing, which
Nice.
activates our parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve, lowers our heart rate, blood pressure, our blood sugar, lowers the adrenaline and cortisol in our body. So we get up in the morning, we open the blinds, we do our morning hygiene, we find a comfortable place to sit, we close our eyes, we start with slow, deep breathing, and we do this for 30 or 45 seconds, and then we do a self-guided tour, first the G and gain, that for which we're grateful, which we've discussed, something uncomfortable that we learn to accept, our intention, which can be just focusing on what's happening right now with our current
Mm.
sensations. Start with 5 seconds of that and then expand it. And then go to non-judgment. So this is a tool for learning how to drop judgments. So we're
Okay.
sitting, and this is an example. There are many ways to do this, but this is one of my favorites. Sitting with our eyes closed, breathing slowly and deeply into our abdomen, really expanding, having this sense of expansion, slowness, deepness. Picture an image of the Earth apparently suspended in space, one of these beautiful NASA images. And the Earth, although it is a beautiful planet, really is neither good nor bad. The Earth does not possess the qualities of goodness and badness. It just is the planet that it is. It's obvious to us when we see things with this clarity.
Mhm.
And we link this to our slow, deep breathing, this awareness of the Earth being beautiful, but just a planet, neither good nor bad. And then it dawns on us that it's only logical for us to think that I too am just a human being. I am neither good nor bad. I'm just the person that I am. I'm just the human that I am. And
Mhm.
we link this to our slow, deep breathing. And we link this I amness. I am neither good nor bad. I simply am
Mhm.
that I am. I simply the person that I am, and linking this to the breath. And we sit with that for several cycles of the slow, deep, intentional breathing. And then we transition just to focus on the breath before we slowly open our eyes. But this is a tool, it's a practice for learning how simply to drop the judgments.
Mhm.
And this is a way of looking at the world, looking at the others, looking at others in our life, and most notably ourselves. We don't have to judge things as good or bad.
Mhm.
We want to discern. I have an hour for lunch. Do I want to spend this with Tara, who's upbeat and fun and engaged, or with another friend of mine who's rather down and kind of complaining and doesn't appear to be a very grateful person, but I love him like a brother.
Mhm.
I want to discern which of these two people do I want to spend this hour with. And most of the time, it's going to be Tara, my
Mhm.
upbeat, engaged, pragmatic, forward-looking, positive, optimistic friend. But that doesn't mean that the other friend is bad. I don't
Right.
have to confer
Right.
this quality of goodness or badness to
Right.
either person. They
Yes.
just are the person that they are, as I am. And I
Mhm.
may discern that I'd rather spend that hour with Tara, but again, it doesn't make the other friend bad. It doesn't
Mhm.
make Tara good. So this is just an exercise in realizing our true nature, kind of sinking into this
Mhm.
awareness that we don't have to judge as good or bad. All
Mhm.
people are inherently, I would say, I look at the world with benevolent indifference. So there's a little bit of benevolence involved, not so far as to create a judgment, but indifference meaning I'm open to all things without bias, prejudice, or judgment. And
Mhm.
we can rewire our brains to interact with the world around us and ourselves in this way.
Mhm.
So
So
it's really
huge.
these practices are all about rewiring our brains toward a state of happiness and peace and letting go of this negativity, this judgment, this distraction with creating the inability to be present, which is how our
Mhm.
brains are wired through evolution for our survival. But we now have the luxury to rewire our brains toward happiness. We're
Mhm.
not so worried about surviving anymore. Most of us are in a place where we don't really have to worry about survival. So
Mhm.
if this is something we have the intention to do, the pathways are very available to us.
Mhm.
You have your practice and the way you teach.
Mhm.
Likewise, for me, there are many, many ways to
Yeah.
approach these simple truths. I think the
Mhm.
simple truths are physical well-being, which is very intertwined with our spiritual well-being, sleep, exercise, nutrition, supplements, drugs being maybe under that umbrella for health and longevity. And on the mental and spiritual side, gratitude, acceptance, intention, and non-judgment. So I think it's
Mhm.
really helpful to kind of whittle things down to their essence and
Mhm.
try to make things as simple as possible. But the good news
Yeah.
is that all of these things are readily accessible.
Yeah, yeah. I refer to non-judgment in my coaching as good bad thinking. Okay. And it's a huge thing. It's just getting into this place where let's use food as an example, like instead of thinking, oh, the cheesecake is bad and the protein shake is good, or vice versa. It depends on the person. Um, Instead thinking, what do I choose? What do I want? What are the results? What will I experience as a result of that? Coming into a much more neutral place. Like the cheesecake tastes good. It's one of my favorite desserts. I'm definitely not living a life without cheesecake in it ever. But right now, let's see. I don't know. I think I don't want it to take down my brain performance. I've noticed I get a little foggy when I do that. So like okay, I'll save that for later, maybe, when it feels like the right time. And I'm going to go with the protein shake for now. Like it's much more neutral. Nothing, you're not a good girl because you had or good boy because you had the protein shake, or a bad person, but it gets intertwined like that. And so I have definitely noticed that to be a huge part in like a health journey. You're not like a good person or something because you went and worked out today. It's just purely like within yourself, like choosing, how do I want to manage things today? How do I want to feel? How do I want to play
Mhm.
this? And being good with that choice that you made. Like if it's like definitely not a good day to work out today. I got crazy sleep and I feeling kind of inflamed, and like definitely not. It's just being good with the decisions that you're making. And the last little thing I'll add to that is like when it comes to other people and judgment, just sharing, I went through a huge process with, just straight from my guides. Like, it was like, your only work right now is unconditionally love everyone, right? So I went through a huge practice with unconditional love, had it like on my, my screensaver, on my thing on my fridge, just really big, love everyone unconditionally, right? So I was just reminding myself, and I found it to be the ultimate hack for getting into the state of non-judgment. Like as soon as I was like, "Ooh, that jerk, I can't believe he blah, blah, blah," Not saying I didn't have those moments, but when I caught myself and I'm like, love him unconditionally. Whoa! All of a sudden it was like, so easy to have boundaries, nothing but love. Good luck on your journey. I've got all sorts of stuff I'm working through too, just this really neutral energy. So I found that to be a good cue, like a coaching cue for myself in terms of getting to that state, is like unconditionally love them. Whoa, it's wounded, blah, blah, blah. And I don't have to play if I don't want to. I also don't have to be mad at them. Yay. So just throwing that out there. And then the last thing, I just wanted to hit on intention a little more because we skipped that one. So can you share a little bit more on that part of
Well, I
game?
think we've been discussing it, Tara. The
Mhm.
fact is, our brains are wired in certain ways, which seem to interfere with our ability to be happy and at peace. And so, if we want to be happy and at peace, we have to have a plan. Because if we just relax into our default mode, we have all these default mode circuits in our brain that are
True.
firing all the time. And if we pay no attention, we we default to those
Right.
circuits. And
Right.
so if we want to evolve to become happier, more grateful, accepting, non-judgmental, love unconditionally, we have to have a plan, right? We have to have purposefulness. We have to have intention.
Right.
That's why John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as awareness of the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally, because we have to do it on purpose. And the good news is when we decide to do something and we have a plan, we have an intention, there are people like you out there to help. There are a myriad of resources we have access to,
Yeah.
but we have to have a plan. And if we do, there's a lot of help out there, both in
Yeah.
the outside world and internally. And so, but it starts with having a plan, having intention.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much. We will link up your website, which is greghammermd.com, and your Instagram, which is Greg Hammer MD. And obviously your book. And again, the title of it is Gain Without Pain, the Happiness Handbook for Healthcare Professionals, but also I'd say for everyone. So yeah, any last words that you'd like to share?
Well, I always like to remind anybody who's listening that anybody who is a bit obsessed with the past and negativity and feeling depressed, feeling sad, feeling isolated, that we're all this way. This is the way our brains are wired. We all have a negativity bias. We
Yeah.
all have trouble enjoying and fully experiencing the present moment. So you are not alone. This is not your dirty little secret. Feel free to discuss it with your friends. Be out with it. It'll help you let go of it.
Yeah.
And, we're all in the same boat.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Tara.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Inside Out Health Podcast. I hope this episode served as inspiration and something that you needed to hear in your life. If you have a friend or family member that you think would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And also, please subscribe. I have so many more amazing guests coming. I have just been so gifted and honored to meet so many incredible health professionals in my career, and I cannot wait to share their messages with you guys. So please subscribe. And if you could be so kind as to rate my show, I would really appreciate it. This podcast is honestly an intuitive call to me to help spread goodness to the world. And so if you guys can help me do that, I would really appreciate it. If you want more info on this guest, pop over to my website, check out my podcast section, and you can get links to everything we talked about in the show, and find out more about this guest and where you can go from here. Make sure you're also following me on Instagram. That is my most active platform. You can find me at Coach Tara Garrison. You can also find me on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. Everything is Coach Tara Garrison across the board. And then, if you want to send me a message, guys, and let me know other guests or other topics you want to hear on the show, please let me know. I am here to serve you. So would love to hear from you, would love your feedback on the show. And if you share any of these episodes, please tag me on social media. It's Coach Tara Garrison.